The drying room was thick with tension. Martin and Peter stood face to face with the men in suits. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the hum of machinery.
You do know I have a dead switch.
The words hung in the air. The men in suits froze. Their eyes darted to each other, then to their earpieces. Whispers crackled through the comms. Uncertainty flickered across their faces. The moment stretched, a taut string about to snap. Peter watched, holding his breath. His heart pounded against his ribs. The air was thick with unspoken threats. The room felt small, suffocating. He could feel the sweat prickling on his skin. Then, movement. The suits retreated. Their urgency was palpable. They melted out of the drying room, leaving a void in their wake. The silence that followed was almost deafening. "Thank God," Peter breathed. He placed a hand on Martin's shoulder, feeling the tension drain out of him. They both let out breaths they hadn't realized they were holding. The silence of the drying room was replaced by the familiar sounds of Marsh Court, the hum of distant traffic, the muffled voices of neighbors. Life went on, seemingly oblivious to the confrontation that had just occurred. But the sense of relief was short-lived. A knot of unease tightened in Peter's stomach. The men in suits had backed down, but they hadn't gone away. They were being watched. Of that, Peter was certain. Every creak of the floorboard, every shadow in the hallway seemed to whisper a warning. The drying room, once a place of work, now felt tainted, a stage for a silent battle. The smell of chemicals hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface. Days bled into weeks. The men in suits didn't return. A fragile peace settled over Marsh Court, but the feeling of being watched lingered, a persistent itch beneath Peter's skin. One morning, Martin arrived at Peter's door, his face pale. He clutched a sheaf of papers in his hand.
You got one of these?
He asked, his voice tight. Peter took the papers. They were official-looking documents, stamped with a logo Amber Construction.
What is this?
Peter muttered, flipping through the pages. The language was dense, impenetrable, but the underlying message was clear. They were in danger. The next day, the car park of Marsh Court was transformed. A cluster of shipping containers materialized, their metallic walls gleaming in the weak winter sun. A sign declared Amber Construction Site Office. The tenants of Marsh Court watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Who was Amber Construction? And what were they building? No one seemed to know. A figure emerged from the site office. A woman. She was short, with a pinched face and a shock of red hair. She wore a fluorescent orange vest and a hard hat, making her look like a child playing dress-up.
Who is she, and what are they up to?
The uncertainty hung heavy in the air, mingling with the cold as the residents of Marsh Court braced themselves for what was to come. The woman strode towards the building, her heels clicking on the pavement. She stopped at the entrance and began knocking on doors, her knocks sharp and demanding.
"Compliance check," she announced, her voice surprisingly loud. "Open up."
Peter watched from his window as the woman made her way down the hallway. He could hear her knocking on doors, her voice growing louder with each knock.
A sense of dread coiled in my stomach. I knew somehow that this was just the beginning. Amber Construction was not what it seemed. They were here for something else, something sinister.
The woman in the orange vest, a jarring splash of color against the drab concrete of Marsh Court, became a regular fixture. Her name, she declared with a strained smile that never reached her eyes, was Brenda.
Brenda's compliance checks were thorough, intrusive, and always conducted with an unnerving silence.
She roamed each flat, her eyes scanning every corner, every crack in the walls, as if searching for something more than just building code violations. Her presence, a constant reminder of Amber Construction's encroaching control, hung heavy in the air. The once familiar sounds of the building, the creaking pipes, the murmur of conversations, were now punctuated by the sharp rap of Brenda's knuckles on another unsuspecting tenant's door. The arrival of the workers amplified the unease that had settled upon Marsh Court. They came in unmarked vans, their faces grim, their movements precise and practiced. No logos adorned their worn overalls, no name tags offered a hint of identity. These men were shadows, slipping in and out of flats, their voices low and hushed as they went about their mysterious tasks.
They tore down walls, ripped up floorboards, and installed strange new fixtures that seemed to hum with an unseen energy.
The tenants, their whispers laced with suspicion and fear, shared stories of these encounters.
Some spoke of being followed, of catching glimpses of cold, calculating eyes watching them from the shadows.
The knock on the door came in the dead of night. It was a soft, hesitant tap, barely audible above the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. He strained to listen, his senses on high alert. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through him. He knew instinctively that it wasn't Martin at the door. He heard the soft padding of footsteps retreating down the hallway, then silence. The silence, heavier than before, pressed down on him, amplifying the frantic beating of his heart. The next morning, the memory of the nighttime intrusion hung over Peter like a shroud. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes followed his every move.
"They're getting bolder," he said, his voice grim. "We need to be careful."
The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface of their lives had boiled over. It permeated every corner of Marsh Court, seeping into their conversations, their dreams, their every waking moment. The city outside throbbed with a nervous energy, a palpable hum that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of Marsh Court.
Asterisk, perched on the edge of his threadbare armchair, felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into him, tracking his every move.
Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the floorboard a whispered warning. He found himself constantly checking over his shoulder, his gaze darting to darkened corners and empty doorways. Sleep offered little respite, his dreams haunted by faceless figures and the echo of approaching footsteps. He tried to focus on a book, the words blurring before his eyes. The weight of unseen observation pressed down on him, suffocating, relentless. A cold sweat clung to his skin, a constant reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond his perception. The air itself felt thick with suspicion, every cough, every rustle of fabric a potential betrayal. The once familiar comfort of his small flat had transformed into a cage, its walls closing in, threatening to crush him.
Nightfall brought little comfort. From my window, I watched as shadows stretched and twisted in the urban canyons below. Unmarked vans, their windows tinted black, circled the block with a predatory slowness, their presence a silent threat. Strangers, their faces hidden beneath hooded sweatshirts and pulled-down caps, loitered in doorways and beneath flickering streetlights. Their eyes, cold and calculating, followed me as I moved through the dimly lit streets, my every instinct screaming at me to run, to disappear into the anonymity of the city. Whispers of illicit dealings and whispered conversations, their words just out of reach, followed me like a chilling breeze. I glimpsed exchanges in darkened alleyways, briefcases changing hands, the flash of a blade beneath a streetlight. The line between reality and paranoid delusion blurred. Was I truly in danger, or was my mind, frayed by fear and uncertainty, playing tricks on me? The answer, I feared, was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. A strange tension had gripped the city, a palpable sense of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. The news, a constant barrage of fear-mongering and thinly veiled propaganda, spoke of rising crime rates, a new virus spreading through the homeless population, and the ever-present threat of terrorism. The authorities, their faces grim, their voices laced with barely concealed urgency, urged citizens to be vigilant, to report any suspicious activity, to trust no one. Checkpoints sprung up on street corners, their presence a stark reminder of the tightening grip of control. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of life, was unraveling, thread by thread. Fear, like a virus, spread through the population, poisoning every interaction, every relationship. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. Friends whispered behind cupped hands, and families retreated behind closed doors. Their sanctuaries transformed into prisons. I felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition of something terrible looming on the horizon. The world I thought I knew, the world I had always taken for granted, was crumbling around me, and I was powerless to stop it. The first sign was a rash, a cluster of angry red welts that appeared on the arms and faces of the building's most vulnerable residents. The elderly, the infirm, the ones who slipped through the cracks of society, forgotten and ignored.
Then came the fever, burning hot, consuming its victims from the inside out. Their eyes, once full of life, turned glassy and vacant, their skin taking on a sickly, yellowish hue.
The whispers intensified, carrying a new word on their breath: pox. A disease, they said, that preyed on the weak, that spread like wildfire through the crowded, unsanitary conditions of the city's underbelly.
Peter watched in horror as the pox tightened its grip on Marsh Court. He saw the fear in the eyes of his neighbors, heard the desperate coughs echoing through the thin walls. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the disease was only the beginning, a harbinger of something far more sinister lurking just beyond the veil of their understanding. The announcement came through crackling loudspeakers, a disembodied voice echoing through the deserted streets. A citywide lockdown, effective immediately. All citizens were ordered to remain in their homes, to avoid contact with others, to await further instructions.
The iron gates of Marsh Court clanged shut, sealing the residents inside their crumbling sanctuary. The outside world, once a distant hum, receded even further, becoming a phantom limb, a memory of a life that no longer existed.
Panic bloomed in the close confines of the building. Food supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and the thin veneer of civility that had once held them together began to crack and crumble under the weight of fear and uncertainty.
Peter watched from his window as armed soldiers, their faces obscured by gas masks, patrolled the streets below their boots, echoing on the empty pavement. He felt a shiver run down his spine. The lockdown, he knew, was not about protecting them. It was about containing them, about preventing the truth from escaping the crumbling walls of Marsh Court.
The lockdown settled over Marsh Court like a shroud. Days bled into weeks, each one indistinguishable from the last. The air, heavy with the stench of disinfectant and fear, was thick enough to choke on. The silence, broken only by the occasional cough or muffled sob, was a constant reminder of their isolation.
Peter watched in horror as the pox tightened its grip on the building. It moved like a phantom, striking without warning, leaving a trail of fear and despair in its wake. He saw it in the sunken eyes of his neighbors, heard it in their raspy breaths, felt it in the trembling of their hands as they reached out for help that never came.
The authorities, their promises of a cure ringing hollow, had abandoned them. The only contact from the outside world came in the form of crackling radio broadcasts, filled with propaganda and thinly veiled threats. The message was clear: they were on their own. Fear, like the pox itself, spread through the building, infecting their thoughts, their dreams, their every waking moment. The walls of Marsh Court, once a refuge from the chaos of the city, now felt like the walls of a prison, closing in, suffocating them with their silent menace.
I found solace in my friendship with Martin. Our shared fear was a fragile bond in a world gone mad. We spent our days huddled in my small flat, sharing dwindling supplies, trading stories, clinging to the remnants of our sanity.
But even our friendship couldn't completely dispel the darkness that had settled over us. The weight of our situation, the knowledge that we were trapped, hunted by an unseen enemy, pressed down on us, threatening to crush our spirits.
The weight of their confinement pressed down on them, a tangible force that threatened to crush their spirits. The silence of Marsh Court, once comforting in its familiarity, now echoed with the ghosts of their former lives. Yet, within the suffocating grip of fear and uncertainty, a spark of defiance began to flicker.
I watched Martin, his normally jovial face hardened by resolve. Martin, who once found solace in the mundane rhythms of our shared existence, now spoke in hushed tones of resistance, of uncovering the truth that lay hidden beneath the layers of deceit and manipulation.
The seeds of rebellion sown in the fertile ground of our despair began to take root. We devoured every scrap of information we could scavenge from the static-laced radio broadcasts, our minds working feverishly to connect the dots, to unravel the threads of the conspiracy that ensnared us.
I felt a surge of adrenaline, a long-dormant instinct for survival awakening within me. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was tempered now by a newfound determination, a refusal to be a passive victim in the unfolding drama.
The more they learned, the more horrifying the truth became. The pox, they discovered, was not a naturally occurring virus, but a carefully engineered weapon, unleashed upon the unsuspecting populace. The lockdown, a brutal exercise in population control, designed to contain the spread of dissent along with the disease.
We were pawns in a game played by unseen masters, our lives deemed expendable in the pursuit of some sinister agenda. Yet, with this realization came a sense of clarity, a terrifying understanding of the forces we were up against.
The labyrinth stretched out before us, a tangled web of lies, betrayal, and unimaginable cruelty. But we had found the thread, the single strand of truth that could lead us out of the darkness. The question was, did we have the courage to follow it, to confront the architects of our nightmare?
The stakes had never been higher. Their lives, their very humanity, hung in the balance. But they had come too far to turn back now. They had glimpsed the abyss, and it had stared back, its gaze cold and unforgiving. Marsh Court, once a symbol of their confinement, now represented a strange sanctuary, a battleground where the forces of light and darkness clashed. They were no longer just tenants, but warriors, fighting for their right to exist, to reclaim their stolen lives.
We moved through the shadows, our movements honed by fear and necessity, our eyes constantly searching for signs of the enemy, our ears attuned to every whisper, every creak of the floorboards.
We knew that the odds were stacked against us, that our pursuers were ruthless and well-equipped. But we also knew that we had something our enemies could never possess, the unwavering strength of human connection, the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of shared suffering.
The battle for Marsh Court, for their souls, had begun.